The first thing I noticed wasn't a message, or a smell, or some sudden change in the way she touched me. It was timing. Her name was Laura, and for years she got home at 5:58. Not 5:50. Not 6:10. Always right before 6. She'd complain about traffic while slipping off her shoes, like clockwork. It was one of those small things you never comment on because it feels permanent. Like gravity. Like the sun setting where it's always set. Then one Tuesday she came in at 6:21. I remember because I was standing at the stove, watching pasta boil over. I'd overfilled the pot and wasn't paying attention. When the water spilled, it hissed on the burner and snapped me out of whatever I'd been thinking about. I turned the heat down, wiped the counter, and glanced at the clock again. 6:21. Laura walked in smiling, still holding her phone, thumbs moving fast. She didn't look up right away. Just said, "Hey," like I was furniture. Like I was part of the room. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the guy who notices 23 minutes. I didn't want to be the guy who counts. She kissed my cheek a second later, quick, distracted. Her perfume lingered longer than usual. Not stronger. Just fresher. Like it hadn't been living on her all day. Traffic was awful, she said. It sounded rehearsed. Not dramatically. Just polished. Like a sentence she'd already said once that day, to someone else, and it had worked. That night was normal. Dinner. Dishes. One episode of a show we weren't really watching anymore but kept finishing out of habit. Laura laughed at the right moments. She asked about my day. I answered without detail, like I was trying not to stir anything up. I went to bed thinking I was tired. The next morning, she was already awake when my alarm went off. That wasn't normal either. She was sitting at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, hair falling over one shoulder. She smiled when she saw my eyes open. "Morning," she said softly. Too softly. I don't know why that bothered me. It shouldn't have. Couples are allowed to have mornings. But something about it felt careful. Like she was handling something fragile, and she didn't know whether it would crack. I told myself I was imagining things. I was under stress at work. Deadlines. Money. All the boring adult stuff people project onto their relationships when they don't want to deal with themselves. For the next week, nothing obvious happened. No red flags. Just small things drifting out of place, like the picture frame on the hallway wall that's suddenly crooked, and you can't stop seeing it. Her phone was always face down now. Not aggressively. Just deliberately. Like a habit she'd trained herself into without realizing. She started showering as soon as she got home. Not every day. Just often enough that it stood out. She'd drop her bag, say, "I'm gross," and disappear into the bathroom. I'd hear the water running while I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the fridge hum, listening to the pipes, listening to nothing. Once, I asked if she wanted to eat first. "In a minute," she said. "I'll be quick." She wasn't. I'd catch her smiling at her phone in the mornings. Not laughing. Just that soft smile people get when they're being seen by someone who isn't in the room. When I'd walk by, she'd tilt the screen away without thinking. Not dramatically. Automatically. That was the part that stuck with me, the lack of panic. If she were doing nothing wrong, there'd be no reason to hide. If she were doing something very wrong, I'd expect more fear. This was something in between. I didn't want to see it. I actively worked against seeing it. I defended her in my own head like a lawyer arguing both sides, even when I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. She's allowed privacy. Work is stressful right now. You're projecting. Don't become paranoid. I'd repeat those thoughts while brushing my teeth, while driving, while answering emails. Like mantras. Like if I said them enough, they'd become true. One night, I picked up her phone without realizing it. It was sitting on the coffee table while she was in the shower. My phone was upstairs. I just needed to check the time. The screen lit up. Passcode required. I stared at it longer than I should have. 4 dots. Empty. She'd changed it. We'd known each other's codes for years. Not as a trust exercise. Just convenience. If one of us was driving, the other would unlock maps or answer a text. Somewhere along the way, Laura had changed it and never mentioned it. I felt stupid for feeling hurt. I also felt something else, small, cold, and unmistakable, move into my chest and sit down. When she came back into the room, towel wrapped around her hair, I was staring at the TV without seeing it. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Too fast." "Just tired." That became my default answer. Over the next few weeks, her schedule got looser. Not chaotic. Just flexible in a way it hadn't been before. Late meetings. Team dinners. Last-minute things she forgot to mention. Once, she came home carrying a paper bag from a restaurant across town. A nice one. The kind we'd only go to for birthdays. "Oh, they ordered extra," she said. I wasn't that hungry. The bag was still warm. I thanked her and ate the leftovers standing at the counter while she showered again. The food tasted good. That bothered me more than it should have, like even the evidence was trying to be pleasant. I started noticing timestamps. Not obsessively. Just passively. Like you do when something doesn't quite add up and your brain starts collecting tiny receipts you didn't ask for. A text sent at 7:43 but not delivered until later. Up leaving now that turned into 40 minutes. A meeting that overlapped another meeting she'd already mentioned. None of it was proof. It was texture. I didn't check her phone. I didn't track her location. I didn't follow her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted the version of our life where this was just a phase of distance, not deception. I wanted to wake up one day and laugh at myself for ever suspecting anything. One Saturday morning, she said she was going to yoga. She wore leggings I hadn't seen in a while. Did her makeup more carefully than usual. Kissed me before she left. She came back 90 minutes later. Her hair was damp. Not sweaty damp. Shower damp. "Did you shower there?" I asked, casually, like I didn't care either way. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, so small I might have missed it if my body hadn't already been tuned to those fractions. "No," she said. "I just rinsed off at home really fast before." I nodded. Said okay. Went back to scrolling my phone. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd been home the whole time. I'd heard every floorboard, every cabinet, every quiet second. There had been no shower. That afternoon, I found a receipt when I went looking for a pen in her purse. I wasn't snooping. I honestly just needed a pen. The receipt fell out like it wanted to be seen. 2 entrees. 2 drinks. 1 dessert. Thursday night. The same Thursday she'd said she grabbed something quick with the team. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't confront her. I didn't even reread it. It wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding what was happening to me, why my chest kept tightening, why the house felt different even when nothing big had happened. I started sleeping lighter. Waking up when she shifted in bed. Not because I was suspicious. Because my body was alert in a way it hadn't been before, like it was listening for footsteps in the dark. One night, Laura fell asleep on the couch with her phone tucked under her thigh. The TV glowed silently. The dogs were snoring. Everything looked peaceful in the way a photograph looks peaceful, still and staged. Her phone buzzed. She didn't move. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough to hate myself a little. Then I slid it out and turned it over. The screen lit up. Passcode required. I stared at it longer than I should have. 4 dots. Empty. She'd changed it. We'd known each other's codes for years. Not as a trust exercise. Just convenience. If one of us was driving, the other would unlock maps or answer a text. Somewhere along the way, Laura had changed it and never mentioned it. I felt stupid for feeling hurt. I also felt something else, small, cold, and unmistakable, move into my chest and sit down. When she came back into the room, towel wrapped around her hair, I was staring at the TV without seeing it. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Too fast." "Just tired." That became my default answer. Over the next few weeks, her schedule got looser. Not chaotic. Just flexible in a way it hadn't been before. Late meetings. Team dinners. Last-minute things she forgot to mention. Once, she came home carrying a paper bag from a restaurant across town. A nice one. The kind we'd only go to for birthdays. "Oh, they ordered extra," she said. I wasn't that hungry. The bag was still warm. I thanked her and ate the leftovers standing at the counter while she showered again. The food tasted good. That bothered me more than it should have, like even the evidence was trying to be pleasant. I started noticing timestamps. Not obsessively. Just passively. Like you do when something doesn't quite add up and your brain starts collecting tiny receipts you didn't ask for. A text sent at 7:43 but not delivered until later. A leaving now that turned into 40 minutes. A meeting that overlapped another meeting she'd already mentioned. None of it was proof. It was texture. I didn't check her phone. I didn't track her location. I didn't follow her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted the version of our life where this was just a phase of distance, not deception. I wanted to wake up one day and laugh at myself for ever suspecting anything. One Saturday morning, she said she was going to yoga. She wore leggings I hadn't seen in a while. Did her makeup more carefully than usual. Kissed me before she left. She came back 90 minutes later. Her hair was damp. Not sweaty damp. Shower damp. "Did you shower there?" I asked, casually, like I didn't care either way. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, so small I might have missed it if my body hadn't already been tuned to those fractions. "No," she said. "I just rinsed off at home really fast before." I nodded. Said okay. Went back to scrolling my phone. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd been home the whole time. I'd heard every floorboard, every cabinet, every quiet second. There had been no shower. That afternoon, I found a receipt when I went looking for a pen in her purse. I wasn't snooping. I honestly just needed a pen. The receipt fell out like it wanted to be seen. 2 entrees. 2 drinks. 1 dessert. Thursday night. The same Thursday she'd said she grabbed something quick with the team. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't confront her. I didn't even reread it. It wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding what was happening to me, why my chest kept tightening, why the house felt different even when nothing big had happened. I started sleeping lighter. Waking up when she shifted in bed. Not because I was suspicious. Because my body was alert in a way it hadn't been before, like it was listening for footsteps in the dark. One night, Laura fell asleep on the couch with her phone tucked under her thigh. The TV glowed silently. The dogs were snoring. Everything looked peaceful in the way a photograph looks peaceful, still and staged. Her phone buzzed. She didn't move. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough to hate myself a little. Then I slid it out and turned it over. The screen lit up with a single preview line. "Can't stop thinking about earlier." No name. Just that. My chest felt hollow, like air rushing out of something sealed too tight. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. I took a picture of the screen with my own phone. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than the message did. Then I put her phone back and went upstairs. I lay awake listening to the ceiling fan click, replaying that sentence until it stopped sounding like words and started sounding like noise. By morning, I wasn't angry. I was clear. After that night, things didn't explode. That's something people don't tell you. There was no immediate confrontation, no sleepless screaming match, no moment where everything came pouring out like a movie. Life kept moving. That was the strangest part. The world didn't care that my marriage had shifted on its axis. Laura made coffee the next morning like always. Same mug. Same amount of cream. She asked if I wanted eggs. I said no. My stomach felt tight, like it does before a long drive. She noticed something was off. I could tell. She kept glancing at me, not long enough to start a conversation, just enough to check whether I was still in the dark. "You sleep okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. It wasn't true, but it was easier than explaining that I hadn't really slept at all. That I'd been lying there cataloging moments from the last few months, lining them up like evidence even though I wasn't sure what I planned to do with it. She left for work at 8:10. Normal time. She kissed me goodbye, lingering a second longer than usual. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in either. When the door closed, the house felt quieter than it should have. Not lonely. Empty in a precise way, like something had been removed carefully. I didn't go through her things. I didn't sit at the computer replaying messages or stalking social media. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat through meetings and nodded at the right moments. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I'd shifted into observation mode. I stopped filling in gaps for her. That was the biggest change. I'd always been good at that, explaining away delays, smoothing over inconsistencies, choosing the most generous interpretation without realizing that's what I was doing. Now I just let things be what they were. When she said she was running late, I didn't respond with "no worries." I just said, "Okay." When she told me about a new coworker she'd been working closely with, I listened without interrupting. She mentioned his name once, casually. Evan. She said it like it was nothing. Like I was supposed to already know it. I didn't react. I didn't need to. The name slid into place quietly, like the last piece of a puzzle you've already finished but didn't want to admit you were building. Over the next week, Evan became real without ever being present. He existed in fragments. A notification that popped up on her phone before disappearing. A Slack message she laughed at, then locked the screen. A calendar invite she deleted before I could read the details. She never talked about him directly. Never said, "Evan and I," or "Evan thinks." It was always "we," or "the team," or "someone at work." That told me more than if she'd over-explained. Over-explaining is panic. This was practice. One evening, Laura came home unusually energized. Not happy exactly. Focused. Like someone with a plan. She changed clothes quickly, brushed her hair again, then said she needed to hop back on a call. At 7:30. She took it in the bedroom with the door closed. That wasn't new in itself, but her voice was different. Softer. Slower. Like she was choosing words carefully, like she was trying to sound like a person she wanted someone else to keep liking. I stood in the kitchen, pretending to load the dishwasher while listening to the rhythm of her speech through the door. I couldn't hear the words. Just tone. You learn someone's tone after years together. This wasn't professional. It was intimate without being obvious. Familiar. After the call, she came out smiling. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just work stuff." She went to bed early that night. Fell asleep quickly. I stayed up, staring at my phone, wondering when exactly a life becomes two separate stories sharing one roof. I didn't want to become someone I didn't recognize. That mattered to me more than being right. I didn't want to spiral into paranoia or start acting like a man trying to catch his wife. I wanted to stay myself. So I did one thing. Just one. I started writing things down. Nothing dramatic. No accusations. Just dates and observations. Tuesday, home at 6:21. Thursday, team dinner, receipt shows 2 meals. Saturday, yoga, showered elsewhere. Monday, phone preview, can't stop thinking about earlier. Seeing it laid out stripped away my excuses. Patterns don't argue. They don't defend themselves. They just exist. Laura started noticing my distance. "You've been quiet lately," she said one night as we sat on opposite ends of the couch. "Have I?" I asked. She nodded. "You just seem somewhere else." I almost laughed at that. Almost. "Just thinking," I said. "About what?" I paused. This was a test. Not a conscious one, maybe, but real all the same. She was giving me a chance to open the door, say something vague she could manage, something she could redirect. Work, I said. She relaxed. Just a little. Like she'd been holding her breath. The next morning, I saw her phone unlocked for the first time in weeks. She'd left it on the counter while she showered, screen lit with a message thread. I didn't rush to it. I didn't grab it like it was burning. I walked over slowly and looked. The name at the top was Evan. I didn't read the whole conversation. I didn't need to. The last few messages were enough. Her, last night was nice. Him, yeah. Been thinking about it all day. Her, we have to be careful. I felt something settle then. Not heartbreak. Certainty. Laura came out of the bathroom and saw me standing there. For a split second, her face changed. Not shock. Recognition. Like she'd known this moment was coming and had been rehearsing for it in the back of her mind, quietly, every time she set her phone face down. I stepped away from the phone before she could say anything. I'm not going to read it, I said. She wrapped her towel tighter around herself, like that would protect her from what she already knew was happening. I can explain, she said. I know, I replied. That's what worries me. We sat at the table. She dressed. We didn't touch. She told me pieces of the truth. Not lies exactly. Fragments. That it started as work. That it wasn't supposed to become emotional. That she felt disconnected. That she didn't know how it happened. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I noticed how carefully she avoided certain details. No timelines. No specifics. No ownership. Just mist and distance. Did you sleep with him? I asked. She looked down. Yes, she said. There it was. Plain. Undramatic. No tears. Just a fact placed between us like an object neither of us wanted to touch, but both of us could see. I nodded. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just done being confused. She cried then. Not loudly. Quietly, shoulders shaking. She apologized. She said my name like it could rewind time. My name is Adam, and hearing it like that almost worked. Almost. I didn't comfort her. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while, I said. We'll figure out logistics later. My brother's name is Daniel, and he'd always been the steady one. The kind of person who can hold your silence without trying to fill it. Laura asked if we could fix it. If we could go to counseling. If I still loved her. I told her the truth. I love the person I thought I was married to, I said. I don't know who this is yet. I packed that night. Not in a rush. Not angrily. I folded clothes. I chose books. I unplugged chargers. I moved through the house like I was checking out of a life that had been double booked. Laura watched from the doorway like she wanted to memorize me. When I left, she didn't follow. At Daniel's place, I slept for 10 hours straight. No dreams. Just rest. Over the next few weeks, I didn't reach out unless it was necessary. Bills. Dogs. Mail. I kept communication factual. Polite. Short. Laura sent long messages. Apologies. Explanations. Reflections. Promises. I read them once. I didn't respond. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store. He hesitated, then asked how we were doing. We're separating, I said. That was it. No backstory. No blame. The truth traveled faster than I expected. It always does. I didn't correct rumors. I didn't defend myself. I didn't expose her. I didn't need to. Laura moved out of the house a month later. Said it was too painful to be there alone. I understood that. Pain doesn't mean innocence, but it's still pain. I went back after she left. The house felt different. Lighter. Sadder. Honest. I made coffee and let it go cold on the counter. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't win anything. I didn't lose myself either. That mattered more. Living at Daniel's place felt temporary in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. His guest room still smelled like laundry detergent and cardboard boxes. He'd cleared out a dresser for me, left a towel folded on the bed, didn't ask too many questions. That was a kindness. Not everyone knows how to do that. We talked late the first night. Not about Laura, at least not much. About work. About dumb stuff from when we were kids. About how weird it is to suddenly be back in your 40s eating cereal at midnight in someone else's house. Daniel asked once, carefully, "You okay?" "I think so," I said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't complete. The days settled into a rhythm. I went to work. I worked late without noticing. I started running in the mornings because there wasn't much else to do with the extra time. I slept better than I had in months, which surprised me and also made me feel guilty, like rest was a betrayal of the seriousness of what had happened. Laura texted every day at first. Long messages. Thoughtful ones. Apologies that sounded sincere. She wasn't begging exactly. She was explaining. Trying to make the story make sense retroactively, like if she arranged it neatly enough, it would become forgivable. I didn't argue with her version. I didn't correct it either. I replied only when necessary. Short, neutral responses. Yes. No. Thursday works. I'll pick up the dogs at 6. Eventually, the messages changed tone. Shorter. Less reflective. More practical. She asked if I wanted the couch or if she should sell it. Asked about canceling a streaming service. Asked if I was seeing anyone. That one I didn't answer. I went back to the house the day after she moved out. She'd left it clean. Too clean. Like a rental after checkout. The closets were half empty. The bathroom drawer she used was bare except for a single bobby pin. I stood in the doorway for a while before going in. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like before it became something else. The dogs ran in circles, confused and happy. I let them out back and made coffee. Same mug. Same amount of cream. It tasted different. Not worse. Just unfamiliar. I didn't sit on the couch. I walked through each room slowly, noticing what was gone and what she'd left behind. A plant she didn't care for anymore. A framed photo I'd taken years ago that she must have forgotten was mine. In the bedroom, the bed was made but wrong. The sheets weren't tucked the way I did it. I stripped them and put them straight into the wash without thinking too much about why. That night, alone in the house, I slept on my side of the bed by habit. Woke up reaching for a warmth that wasn't there. The absence felt sharp for about 5 seconds, then dull. Grief isn't constant. It comes in waves that don't announce themselves. A week later, I ran into Evan. Not in a dramatic way. Not at a bar or a restaurant or anywhere cinematic. I saw him at a coffee shop near my office. He was standing in line ahead of me, scrolling his phone, wearing a jacket I recognized from one of Laura's photos. I wouldn't have noticed him if I hadn't already built him in my head. He turned slightly, caught my reflection in the glass, then looked back at me. There was a flicker of recognition. Not fear. Not guilt. Just understanding. He knew who I was. I nodded. Not as a challenge. Just acknowledgement, two men realizing they're standing in the same story from different angles. He hesitated like he might say something. Apologize. Explain. Assert himself. I didn't give him the chance. I stepped out of line and walked away. That was it. That was the entire interaction. I realized later that I didn't feel anything toward him. Not anger. Not curiosity. He wasn't important. He was just proximity. Circumstance. A mirror Laura looked into when she didn't want to look at me. That realization mattered more than I expected. A month after the separation, Laura asked to talk. In person. Neutral place. We met at a cafe halfway between our offices. Public. Quiet. The kind of place people go when they don't want to make a scene. She looked different. Tired. Not physically, exactly. Emotionally. Like someone who'd been holding something heavy and finally set it down, only to realize her arms were weaker now. She told me she'd ended things with him. I believed her. It didn't change anything. I'm not asking you to come back, she said. I just needed you to know. I nodded. Okay. She studied my face like she was trying to read what chapter 1 was on. You seem calm, she said. I am, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. But it was closer than anything I'd said before. She asked if I hated her. No, I said. I don't hate you. Do you still love me? I thought about that longer than she probably wanted me to. I don't know, I said. But I know I don't trust you. And I can't build a life on maybe. That was the closest thing to a boundary I'd ever said out loud. We talked for another half hour. About logistics. About timelines. About the dogs. About what we'd tell people. When we stood to leave, she reached for me instinctively, then stopped herself. Her hand hovered in the air between us like she'd forgotten what it was for. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, I replied. I meant it. The divorce was uncomplicated. No kids. No dramatic financial battles. Just paperwork and signatures and quiet finality. Some friends drifted away. Some surprised me by staying. A few tried to choose sides. I didn't let them. I started cooking again. Real meals. Stuff that took time. I fixed the ring mark on the kitchen table. Sanded it down, refinished the surface. The scar disappeared, but I remembered where it had been. Every now and then, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Laura something small. A joke. An observation. I'd stop. Put the phone down. The urge faded quicker each time. One evening, months later, I sat on the back porch watching the dogs chase bugs in the grass. The sky was doing that thing it does right before dark, soft and quiet and unremarkable in the best way. I realized I wasn't waiting for anything. Not an apology. Not closure. Not karma. Just living. What Laura lost wasn't my anger. It wasn't my forgiveness either. It was access. And I learned something I wish I'd known earlier: dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just stays when everything else leaves. Time didn't heal anything all at once. It sanded things down. Took the sharp edges off first, then the weight. I didn't notice it happening until one day I realized I'd gone an entire afternoon without thinking about her. That felt strange. Not good or bad. Just unfamiliar. Like forgetting the name of a street you used to drive down every day. Life settled into something quieter. I started waking up early without an alarm. Running most mornings, not fast, not far. Just enough to feel my lungs work. I stopped listening to podcasts about productivity and started listening to nothing at all. Just footsteps and breathing and the sound of the neighborhood coming alive. At work, people noticed a change. Not the divorce, that was old news by then, but the way I carried myself. Less apologetic. Less eager to smooth things over. I said no more often. I left on time. I stopped volunteering for things that didn't matter. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. He said it gently, like he wasn't sure whether he was checking in or bracing for bad news. Yeah, I said. And for once, it was completely true. The house began to feel like mine. Not ours -1. Mine. I rearranged furniture. Gave away things I'd kept out of habit. Painted one wall a darker color just because I wanted to see what it would look like in the evening light. I didn't rush into dating. Not out of fear. Out of respect for myself. I wanted to know what my own life felt like before inviting someone else into it. Every now and then, information about Laura drifted in through other people. Not gossip exactly. Just updates. She'd moved apartments. Changed jobs. Lost some friends. Kept others. Life rearranging itself around her choices. I didn't ask questions. I didn't shut people down either. I just listened without attaching myself to the outcome. One evening, months later, my phone buzzed with a message from her. I hadn't heard from her in a while. Hey. I know this is out of the blue. I just wanted to say I hope you're doing well. I stared at it longer than necessary. I typed, deleted, retyped. Then I sent. I am. Hope you are too. That was it. No reopening. No revisiting. No emotional archaeology. I put the phone down and went back to what I was doing. Cooking dinner. Something simple. Chicken, rice, vegetables. Food that didn't require a story. Later that night, I realized something important. Laura no longer had the power to disrupt my peace with a single message. That wasn't because she'd changed. It was because I had. I thought about the men I'd been at the beginning of all this. The one who noticed small things and talked himself out of their meaning. The one who believed trust meant silence. The one who thought dignity required endurance. I didn't judge him. He did the best he could with what he knew. But I wouldn't go back. One weekend, I took a short trip by myself. Nothing dramatic. Just a few days near the water. I walked. I read. I sat in silence without trying to fill it. On the second evening, I watched the sun drop into the horizon and felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness. Contentment. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. I understood then that betrayal doesn't just take something from you. It shows you where you were giving too much of yourself away. I didn't become bitter. I didn't harden. I didn't build walls. I built standards. I learned that love doesn't ask you to ignore your instincts. That loyalty isn't proven through suffering. That leaving quietly can be an act of self-respect, not failure. When people ask me now what happened, I don't tell the whole story. I don't need to. I just say the truth in its simplest form. We wanted different lives. That's enough. Some nights, the house is very quiet. The dog's asleep. The light's low. And I think about how close I came to staying. To negotiating my own boundaries down to something manageable. I'm grateful I didn't. Not because Laura was purely wrong. But because I chose not to be. I don't think about her every day anymore. That might sound like a victory. It isn't. It's just how time works when you stop feeding something. One day you realize the space it used to occupy has been repurposed without your permission. The house has its own rhythms now. Morning light through the kitchen window. The dogs pacing when they hear the coffee grinder. Music playing while I cook, not because it sets a mood, but because I like the noise. Sometimes I catch myself remembering small things. Not the betrayal. Not the silences. Just fragments. The way she used to hum without realizing it. How she always forgot where she parked. The look on her face when she concentrated. Those memories don't hurt. They don't comfort me either. They just exist, like photos you find in a drawer you weren't cleaning out. I've dated since then. Slowly. Carefully. I tell the truth earlier than I used to. I ask better questions. I pay attention to how people answer when they think it doesn't matter. I don't confuse intensity with intimacy anymore. Once, over drinks, someone asked what I learned from my marriage ending. I hated the question. Not because it was rude. Because it wanted a lesson neatly packaged, like pain should come with a receipt. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I learned I don't have to stay where I'm not fully seen, I said. That felt accurate enough. I don't villainize Laura in my mind. That would be easy. It would also be dishonest. She wasn't a monster. She was someone who made a series of quiet choices that eventually became impossible to ignore. I was someone who noticed. That difference matters. Every now and then, I wonder how her life turned out. Not in a longing way. Just curiosity. I imagine her doing okay. Maybe not great. Maybe not terrible. Just okay. Most lives land there. I hope she learned something too. Not for my sake. For hers. What I know for certain is this: I didn't lose myself when she betrayed me. I found myself because I stopped arguing with reality. That's the part people don't talk about. How clarity can feel like grief at first. How letting go of a version of your life hurts more than letting go of a person. I still drink my coffee a little too slowly. Still let it go cold sometimes. Old habits don't disappear just because circumstances change. But now, when something feels off, I listen. I don't explain it away. I don't negotiate with it. I don't wait for proof that will cost me months of peace. I trust the quiet voice that speaks before everything gets loud. If there's a lesson here, it isn't about cheating. It's about attention. To yourself. To patterns. To the way your body reacts before your mind catches up. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away awake. And that's something no one can take from me again.